She dumped her loyal wife for a millionaire. Not knowing she was richer than them all, Celeste Moreau was 39 years old, and for 11 years she had been the kind of wife that women in her neighborhood described in church as steady. She drove a sensible gray Civic with 94,000 miles on it. She packed her lunch in a blue insulated bag her mother had given her years before the cancer took her. She wore the same 4 pairs of shoes depending on the season, and she clipped coupons not because she had to, but because her grandfather had told her that waste was a decision you made twice. Her wife, Donna, introduced her at dinner parties as my project manager, which was accurate, and said it in a tone that made accurate sound like enough. Donna had spent 14 months building her exit while still sleeping in the same bed, still kissing Celeste on the cheek before leaving for work, still asking what she wanted for her birthday, as though those answers still mattered to her. She had found someone new, a woman named Priya Solis, whose family name was attached to 3 commercial real estate holdings in Charlotte, and whose car cost more than what Celeste and Dana owed on their house together. Dana had made her calculation. She had looked at the gray Civic and the blue insulated lunch bag and the 4 rotating pairs of shoes and decided she already knew the total. She was off by $4. $3 million. In the 14 months Dana had been quietly transferring money, quietly reorienting her loyalties, quietly building a life designed to leave Celeste behind, she had moved $112,000 in marital funds through accounts Celeste had been unaware of. What Dana never thought to ask, not once, in 11 years of sharing a home and a name and a kitchen table, was whose name appeared on the accounts Celeste had never mentioned, or why Celeste's grandfather had called her every birthday since she turned 22 and said the same thing without variation: "Don't let them see the books until you're ready." What happened next would cost Dana everything she believed she had so carefully calculated. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning light came through the kitchen window the way it always had, slow and particular, catching the edge of the ceramic backsplash that Celeste had laid herself 8 years ago on a long October weekend. She had mixed the grout at the wrong ratio the first time and had to strip it down and start over from the beginning. She had not complained about this to anyone, because there was no one she needed to tell. She had simply started over. The tiles were irregular in the way handmade things are, slightly uneven, slightly imperfect, entirely hers, and she liked them precisely because they bore the evidence of a correction she had made on her own terms. She sat with her coffee cupped in both hands and looked at those tiles and thought about her grandfather. Harold Moreau had been a civil engineer for 31 years in Memphis, the kind of man who was invisible in rooms full of people who did not understand load calculations, until the moment those people needed a structure to hold. He had retired early, bought a house outright with cash, and spent his final years teaching Celeste what he called the fundamentals: compound quietly, diversify without announcement, and never mistake someone's inability to see your value for an accurate assessment of it. He pressed her hand flat against the kitchen table when he said these things, as if the contact were a transfer, as if he were placing something in her palm she could carry without it showing. He had been gone 6 years. She still heard him almost every morning in that particular quality of early light. She had met Dana in this same city 12 years ago, at a neighborhood association meeting neither of them had particularly wanted to attend. Dana had come for the free coffee and the mild entertainment of civic complaint. Celeste had come because the proposed zoning change on a block 3 streets over would have affected a property she had been quietly managing since her grandfather's estate settled. A small matter she had not mentioned to anyone in the room, because it was not relevant to anyone in the room. They had talked for 40 minutes about parking regulations and light pollution ordinances and walked out into the October dark, already exchanging numbers. Donna was charming in the way genuinely confident people often are, effortlessly, reflexively, with a warmth that appeared natural because it was natural, before things changed. Celeste had loved her for a long time, without reservation or regret. The first sign had not arrived looking like a sign. It arrived looking like a Tuesday evening, 8 months ago, when Dana came home from what she described as a dinner meeting 22 minutes earlier than expected, changed her password on the shared family tablet that same night without explaining why, and cooked the following morning with an attentiveness that felt slightly rehearsed, slightly too warm, slightly too deliberate. The performance of a woman practicing normalcy for an audience she was managing. Celeste noticed the way a logistics director notices a variance in a supply chain, not with alarm, not with accusation, but with the quiet registration of someone whose work had trained her to see what the numbers behind the numbers were actually saying. She filed it away. She kept watching. Then the mail came, a thick envelope, hand-addressed in handwriting that was not Dana's, return label from a law firm downtown whose name Celeste had never heard Dana mention in 11 years of dinner conversation. She did not open it. She photographed the front and back carefully, returned it precisely to its place in the stack, and went to finish making her lunch. Tools were meant to work, not shine. The discovery happened on a Thursday evening in early October, when Dana left her phone charging on the kitchen counter and went to take a long shower. The phone was locked, as it always was now. The passcode changed in August, which Celeste had noticed and stored without comment. The way she stored everything she was not yet ready to use. What she saw was a notification preview on the darkened screen as she walked past. 8 words, visible for 3 seconds before the screen timed out, from a contact saved under a name that had no context in their shared life. Vendor P. Those 8 words told her the essential nature of the situation. They did not tell her everything. She intended to find out everything. Her hands did not shake. She set her own phone on the counter, breathed through her nose for 3 measured seconds, the way her grandfather had taught her to breathe before she said anything she could not unsay, and then walked quietly to the small office off the kitchen where she kept her personal laptop. She sat. She opened the machine. She began to work. Her face remained perfectly calm. It took her 40 minutes to access 5 years of shared bank statements and begin the cross-referencing. The pattern emerged the way structural failures always emerge, when you know how to look. Slowly at first a single anomalous data point that seems minor in isolation, and then with gathering momentum as each new piece connects to the last and the shape of the whole becomes visible. Transfers she had seen and accepted as routine because she had been given no reason to question them. Dinners on the joint account at restaurants she did not recognize and had never visited. A hotel charge in Raleigh placed on a weekend Dana had described as a work retreat, for which there was no hotel in any account Celeste could access, which meant a different card, which meant a separate account she had not been told about, which meant the scope was larger than a moment of poor judgment. She moved with the same deliberate calm that had always defined her. By midnight, she had built a working timeline spanning 14 months. $112,000 in marital funds had moved through channels designed to be invisible. The hotel records, the transferred balances across 3 different transaction points. 6 weekend expenditures that corresponded, date for date, with evenings Dana had described as client obligations she had accepted without question, because she had been, for 11 years, a woman who trusted the person she had built a life alongside. She had been trusting the wrong variable. She did not cry. She created a new folder on her desktop. She named it simply Documentation. She spent the next 2 hours copying, screenshotting, and forwarding relevant records to her personal email address, cross-referencing dates against the family calendar she maintained in a separate system, building a timeline that was clear, chronological, and legally complete. She worked the way she managed any complex logistics problem. Start at the first verified data point, confirm each step before moving to the next. Do not allow the shape of the conclusion to run ahead of the evidence. By 2 a.m, she had a folder that told a story any competent attorney could follow without assistance. She picked up her phone and called the one person she knew would understand exactly what she needed. "Camille," she said softly, "I need your calendar as soon as you have an opening this week." Camille Whitfield said, without pause, "Saturday morning, 8 o'clock. Celeste made no other calls that night. She closed the laptop. She walked down the hall, past the closed bedroom door, to the small bathroom at the end where she kept her own things, and she washed her face with cold water. Then, she went to bed. She slept without difficulty. Camille Whitfield had practiced family law in Charlotte for 19 years and had the kind of professional reputation that meant the opposing side usually returned her calls within the business day. She was 61, meticulous, and wore her authority the way load-bearing structures carry their weight, entirely in the bones of the thing, invisible until you understood what you were looking at. She had known Celeste since before either of them had left Memphis, having grown up attending the same church as Harold Moreau's family, which meant she had known Celeste when Celeste was still learning the fundamentals at her grandfather's kitchen table. She knew exactly what Harold had built. She knew who he had built it for. She had been waiting, without impatience, for the day it became relevant. They sat across from each other at Camille's wide conference table on a cold Saturday morning. Celeste laid the documentation folder in the center of the table without explanation. Camille reviewed it without speaking. The review took 11 minutes. Then she set the papers down and looked at Celeste with the steady attention of a woman who had seen this shape before and understood every contour of it. "You want equitable distribution," she said, "or you want everything that is legally yours?" "Everything that is legally mine," Celeste replied. Camille nodded once, in the way of a person who has already begun to think several steps ahead. "Then, let me walk you through what the next 90 days can look like if we structure this carefully." What it looked like, under North Carolina statute, was a full recovery of documented marital waste, a legal claim attaching to each expenditure Dana had made from marital funds in furtherance of the concealed relationship over 14 months. It included the reclassification of any assets Dana might have attempted to characterize as joint property that had clear premarital or separate documentation. And it opened the possibility of a civil fraud filing that could follow the divorce proceeding if the final accounting warranted it. Camille laid this out the way an engineer lays out a site plan, methodically, without unnecessary drama, with precision about which elements were legally certain and which depended on how a particular judge read a particular statute. "She made a significant error," Camille said, closing the folder. "She made several," Celeste replied. "But the one that will cost her most was deciding she already had the complete inventory." Real power operated in quiet rooms. 3 days after the Saturday meeting, Celeste called her attorney in Maryland, the one who had handled Harold's estate and the subsequent trust restructuring. Documents arrived via certified courier on Tuesday morning. She sat at the kitchen table with a second cup of coffee and let herself look, clearly and completely, at everything she had been building quietly for the duration of her adult life. The trust Harold had established in 2001 held assets now valued at approximately $3.1 million diversified holdings, and 3 Memphis properties Harold had placed in trust during his final working years. The separate property account she had maintained independently since before the marriage, carefully insulated from any commingling, documented precisely, held $890,000. 15 years of consistent contribution, uninterrupted and unannounced. The 4 residential properties she managed in Memphis were appraised at a combined current value of $1 million. Total, $39 million in legally separate, fully documented, cleanly held assets that bore no claim Dana could make that any court would recognize. She had spent 11 years with a woman who decided she understood the inventory. She had not known where the inventory was kept. Preparation is the work. On Thursday evening, Celeste came home and made dinner. She made Dana's preferred meal, shrimp pasta with a particular garlic preparation Dana had always said she could eat every week. A reduction that took real attention and 40 minutes at the stove, and the specific bottle of red they saved for what Dana called good occasion evenings. Celeste set the table with the better dishes. She lit the candle on the counter. She stood back and looked at the table for a moment before she heard Donna's key in the lock. Donna came in carrying the slightly excessive brightness of someone performing ease, her voice a half note too warm, her attention a degree too pointed. The small calibrations of a person maintaining a role she had been maintaining for over a year. She kissed Celeste on the cheek, asked about the day, and talked about work with the comfortable fluency of a woman who had been telling the same story in 2 different registers for 14 months and had gotten very good at both versions. Celeste listened. She nodded. She passed the bread and asked a follow-up question and kept her face in the arrangement it had always been in, attentive, present, unhurried. She watched the performance without reaction the way she watched any system she was preparing to address, completely without interference, until she had a picture so clear that no part of the response needed to be improvised. She was watching. She had the complete picture now. She was simply waiting for the right room to use it. She slept without difficulty that night, and in the morning she called her Uncle James in Memphis. "I need you in Charlotte for 2 days in November," she said quietly. "And I'll need the 2 notarized affidavits we discussed in the spring. I'll send you the flight information." He said he would be there. He did not ask questions. He had known Celeste since she was 9 years old, learning to read architectural drawings at Harold's kitchen table, and he had understood for 30 years that when this woman said she was ready to move, the preparation was already complete. The mediation was scheduled for the 3rd Tuesday of November, at 2 in the afternoon, in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building downtown that Celeste had evaluated in a professional context several years before, and found structurally sound. She arrived 15 minutes early. She wore a charcoal blazer she had purchased on a Tuesday for no particular occasion. She carried the documentation folder and nothing else, because she had learned from Harold that the person who brings only what is necessary has already made a statement about what they know. Camille sat to her right. James Moreau, 73 years old, retired mechanical engineer, co-signatory on the original trust documents, sat to her left. He wore a dark suit. He rested his hands flat on the table. He said nothing, which was its own kind of presence. Dana arrived with her attorney, a man named Garrett who wore expensive shoes and carried a briefcase with the practiced confidence of someone who had reviewed a summary document and believed it told the whole story. He had a way of centering himself in a room that worked well in situations where the opposition did not have better information. He placed his opening papers on the table and smiled with the assurance of a man who had done the math and liked the answer. He had done the wrong math. Garrett spoke first, presenting the shared marital assets with practiced fluency, the house and its current equity position, the joint checking and savings accounts, the 2 vehicles, Dana's retirement contribution, a small joint investment account opened in year 4 of the marriage. He laid the summary at the center of the table. He spoke about equitable distribution with the organized confidence of someone who had arrived to a meeting he expected to control. Celeste let him finish. Then Camille produced the first set of documents, the forensic accounting of documented marital waste, arranged chronologically, cross-referenced against Celeste's preserved calendar records, and the transaction history of the account Dana had maintained separately. 14 months. $112,000. Each entry annotated. Garrett's fluency became something more careful. His eyes moved across the page differently. The second set of documents arrived from Maryland by courier that morning. The trust records, the estate settlement, the 4 property deeds bearing dates that predated the marriage by years, and an asset summary that Camille read aloud at the pace of someone who understands that the most important number in the room does not need to be rushed. Miss Moreau's total documented non-marital assets, Camille said in her 19 years voice, currently stand at approximately $3 million after conservative valuation. Under North Carolina statute, none of it is subject to equitable distribution. Every asset was established, maintained, and documented in full legal separation from the marital estate for the entirety of the marriage. The marital waste claim represents a separately recoverable amount of $112,000, plus applicable legal costs. The room held very still. Donna's expression made the journey Celeste had expected, from the certainty of someone who arrived believing the numbers were settled, to a confusion that rearranged itself slowly, and then to the particular stillness that comes when a person recognizes that the model they were working from was incomplete in ways that cannot now be corrected. Celeste had seen this expression once before, years ago, on a contractor who had submitted a load calculation she had reviewed and found insufficient. The expression was the same. The moment of understanding that someone in the room had always known more than they were shown credit for. Donna said, with the warmth that had once been entirely genuine and was now a habit operating without its original source, Celeste, I think we can still talk about this. I think there's a version of this where we don't have to. James Moreau placed both hands flat on the table. He was quiet for a long moment, in the way of a man who had spent a lifetime around structures and understood the difference between what holds and what gives. Then, he said, Harold did not raise her to negotiate what already belongs to her. One sentence. Garrett looked at his papers. He did not respond. Celeste gathered her copies. She stood. You spent 11 years deciding what I was worth, she said, keeping her voice at its ordinary register, the one she used at the mediation table, at the conference table, at the kitchen table where she had made Dana's favorite dinner 2 weeks ago. You added it up from what I drove and what I packed and what I let you see, and you arrived at a figure that felt manageable to leave behind. That was always your calculation to make. I just never asked you to be accurate about it. She paused for one moment at the door and turned back, not to look at Dana, but to look at the table where the documents lay spread like an accounting of everything that had been miscounted. I'm not angry, she added, quietly. I'm clear. Those are very different things. She walked out. She did not look back. Behind her the room was quiet, and Donna remained at the table surrounded by documentation that mapped the precise shape of 11 years she had believed she understood and had understood only in part. 7 months later, the Japanese maple Celeste had ordered from a small nursery in Asheville was 2 feet tall in the corner of her new backyard, planted in the spot her grandfather would have chosen, in sight of the kitchen window, in the path of the morning light. where she could watch it from the table where she sat with her coffee each morning. She had pressed the soil around its roots herself, firmly but without compacting it, leaving the system room to breathe and expand as it needed to. It would be unremarkable for 2 more years, and then it would be the first thing anyone noticed about the yard. Harold had always planted for the version of the garden he would not be alive to sit in. She had learned from him to think that way. Her Uncle James visited that Thursday and sat on the deck she had designed herself and built with a contractor she had hired after reviewing 3 bids without comment on any of them. They drank coffee from the good mugs she had unpacked first when she moved in, and they talked about the Memphis properties, which had refinanced in September on better terms through a credit union that understood what it was looking at, and which were generating a steady monthly income that neither of them mentioned with any ceremony, because Harold had taught them both that a sound structure did not require announcement. There was someone new. His name was Marcus Webb, and he was a structural engineer who had been mentioned to her by a mutual colleague in January, and who had called once to introduce himself, and then not called again until she had made clear she was interested, because he had understood, apparently without being told, which was in itself a form of information, that she was a person who made her own decisions about her own time. On their first dinner, he had asked her approximately 14 questions about logistics management before volunteering anything about his own work. And when she had mentioned the way supply chains revealed their failures through lag rather than immediate collapse, he had leaned forward with the genuine attention of someone who found that kind of structural thinking interesting for its own sake. She liked him for the questions. She liked him for the patience. She liked the way he didn't perform ease, because he didn't need to. The settlement had finalized in September. Dana's attorney had filed 2 requests for continuance and had ultimately accepted terms that returned the documented marital waste in full, covered legal costs on both sides, and executed the equitable distribution of the actual marital assets as Camille had outlined at the outset. Garrett had not appeared on the final filings. Dana had signed in October, in an office Celeste had not attended, because she had not needed to be present for a conclusion she had already secured. Pria Solis, Celeste learned through a mutual acquaintance who offered the information unprompted, and whom Celeste thanked briefly before redirecting the conversation, had relocated to Raleigh some weeks after the mediation. Dana was living in an apartment in a suburb of Charlotte. Someone who had known them both mentioned, with the careful neutrality of people who have chosen a side they will not say aloud, that Dana seemed tired lately, that she had stopped hosting the dinner parties she had always used to keep their social life organized, and that her mother, a woman who had always been quietly kind to Celeste, and had sent a handwritten note in November that Celeste had read once and placed in the back of a drawer, had reportedly gone some time without returning her daughter's last several calls. Celeste registered all of this the way she registered any closed project report, completely, without residual investment, and then she moved on to what was in front of her. She finished pressing the soil around the maple's base and stood, brushing her palms clean in the single deliberate motion her grandfather had always used. One stroke, palm against palm, and the task was finished. She looked at the small tree for a long moment and felt something she recognized from the years of working alongside Harold in his yard, the particular unhurried satisfaction of having put something in the ground that did not need to be rushed into becoming what it was going to become. She was free. She was solvent. She was unbothered. She had built everything worth keeping, and she had built it the way Harold Moreau had built everything that lasted, quietly, without display, with the work sound where it counted, and the records in order for the day someone finally thought to look. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.